good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our August IMTech Oregon interview sponsored by First Tech Federal Credit Union. I'm Ruthie Ditzler, TAO's Marketing and Regional Programs Coordinator, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm the moderator for the 2021 IMTech Oregon series, and I'm really excited to talk with today's guest about her journey into web design. There are two members of TAO's team with me today, Kara Toronto and Justin Martinez. Justin is running the behind the scenes, so if you have any questions with Zoom, although I think we're all Zoom experts by now, Kara's here in the chat. And then this video is being recorded and it will be shared on TAO's YouTube and across our social media so that folks can hear the story. A few quick reminders before we start. Everyone's muted. And we just ask that people remain on mute unless you're called on to talk or if you have a question. And then if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. And then at the end of the event, the half hour will go by quickly and we've allotted time for audience Q&A using Mentimeter. So Mentimeter, there's a QR code that will be on the screen in just a bit, and then Justin just posted a link in the chat. So if you have questions, you're welcome to put them into Mentimeter during the event, or you can put them in the chat and we'll get them loaded up at the end so that Tiffany can answer all of your questions. We'll reshare these Mentimeter access details at the end of the event. I encourage you to engage with TAO on social media. I'm the human behind our social media accounts and I love comments and takeaways, anything that you think was interesting at the event. I'd love to engage with you there. And you can find all of our handles on the screen. And now without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome our August IMTech Oregon guest, Tiffany Tay, who is currently working as a designer at Supply. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hey everyone, nice to be here.
Awesome. So we're just going to start off as we normally do with a little bit about your backstory. So if you could just share with us a little bit how you ended up in the career you find yourself in today and yeah, what brought you to work at Supply?
Yeah, this is a funny, kind of long-winded question and story. So how I even ended up in the career that I'm at is part of like this lifelong learning of self-love and self-worth. So I remember when I was like 5 years old, my brother drew something for my mom and she basically gave it like high praise, like, oh, that's so nice, that looks so good. And so, you know, wanting that same praise, I like drew something for her and I showed it to her and she was like, oh, okay, like, thanks. And so at that point I was like super determined to like get like my parents, I guess, approval or praise. And so what I ended up doing was just going all in on this like creative endeavor all throughout my younger years, all the way through high school, and just for this like need to prove myself that I am capable and competent at being a creative person. And so I ended up focusing on graphic design as a concentration at university. And my folks, you know, they were not unsupportive throughout my years. They thought it was just more of like a hobby that I had when I was in school. And then when I decided for it to become like my major in college, they had issues with that. And so freshman year, at the end of freshman year, all the students are supposed to pick a major. So we take all of the like prereq creative classes and we pick our concentration. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was focusing on graphic design, but I wasn't really enjoying the field that much. And so, but I was really enjoying photography. So I was in photo classes. And so, you know, I told my parents, hey, I'm gonna stop pursuing graphic design and I'm going to instead pursue photography. And when I said that or told them that, my folks, you know, kind of highly disapproved, I guess. You know, my dad, and I don't believe this at all. I think photography is a really great profession, and there are like really amazing people that are masters of their craft. But in his mind, you know, there's nothing kind of like respectable about being a person that is capable of taking a photo. You know, basically anybody who has a camera can take a photo. So why would you have that be your profession? And so we had this like first and only so far family meeting with like my mom, my dad, and I. We like sat down, and my dad was like trying to get me to change my career path. I was like what, 18 or 19 at the time, and he wanted to like change my path to being like a business major or a doctor or something more respectable in their minds. And I ended up just like sobbing, basically having a meltdown in front of my parents, saying like, oh my God, my life is changing in front of my eyes. Can't believe this, how horrible. And so after doing so, my dad kind of realized, oh my gosh, okay, this really does matter to my daughter, and I don't want to be like the one to make her feel awful. And so he basically had a compromise where they allowed me to stay in the creative field when it came to like my college life, but I would definitely need to still keep the design track going. And if I really love photography so much, I could double major in it. And so I ended up not pursuing photo at the end because it would just add an extra year, and I was already wanting to be done with school. So I ended up graduating with a graphic design degree. Hooray. And at the time I graduated, it was right around the time of like the 2000, right after the 2008 recession. So I was one of the lucky few folks who graduated that was able to get a job right out of school. And so one of my design teachers wrote this nice recommendation for me at one of the local Chicago studios. And what I ended up doing was working as like a junior design contractor. And one of our clients there was Motorola. I know I'm kind of dating myself right now because I was more or less dead at this point. But at the time, you know, more than a decade ago, they were pretty popular. They came out with their Droid devices. And so I got a chance to like work on some really cool Motorola Android kind of production work. Then switched over to, so at the time I was living in Chicago, so that's where I grew up. And then afterwards, I switched to another company. It was a web design development agency, also in Chicago. And after a little while there, so I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and all I had ever really known was the Chicago suburbs, and then moving to Chicago, getting that like vibe or the scene of it. But I think I was like hitting this interesting quarter life crisis where I just wanted to explore more of the world, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, steel buildings and glass and all that concrete jungle notion of things, but I definitely was like craving something more. And so my partner and I at the time we were like having that same itch, and we also were like watching a lot of Portlandia at the time and knowing that the West Coast was like where we wanted to be. So we had this like vision board and wrote all these different destinations down. But I think we like were settling around like around the Pacific Northwest. So that year and that spring, I went to like a web design conference that was hosted at the Motor Center. And I loved Portland. It's just a really cool, chill vibe. And it really resonated with me. And so I convinced my partner, he had not even seen Portland, didn't visit at all, but I was like, we got to move there. It's great. You'll love it. And so we moved. And fortunately, again, as soon as we moved, I was able to find another job, another web design development agency based in Portland. Spent some time there, did some contract work as well, and then switched to my current position as a designer at Supply. I got that specific position through like a contract to hire position with Creative Circle. Oh, and that's where I'm at right now. I know it was a tale. Thank you for hanging on.
No, I love that. I feel like there's folks really identified with some of the things you said. Like, as you were talking about, like the sort of like intervention family meeting that your parents called, like, I just wonder how many of us like change our careers or feel pressured to like towards a certain career because of what our families are saying to us, and I was also thinking about like, you talking about your work and like your background, like wanting to be creative, your background in graphic design, and like web design is just such a cool way. It's like this like intersection, right? It's like plugging you right into like the tech field, but still getting that really creative side of things. So I think it's, for people who don't necessarily see themselves as like a super techie person, it's super awesome to talk about all these different roles in the industry, because there's all these different inroads to like contribute to the final product that's not, like coding or like doing that sort of more technical side of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't like consider myself a technical person at all. And when I was maybe like 12 or 13, I started picking up a little bit of like digital painting or creating like cute little backgrounds for the computer, but I would not consider myself really technical. I mean, I use tech, just not technical.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people who are in the same boat.
For sure.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about like kind of identity. And throughout your career, have you seen yourself represented among peers, among leadership, within the creative community? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say not very often, being both, a woman as well as POC. Outside of maybe like San Francisco or places where there is more of like a tech boom, where there is more of that diversity as well, like specifically on either of the coasts, I guess. Definitely not when I was living in Chicago. It was very much male, very much more white. So yeah, just growing up, it's always been surrounded by predominantly like white communities. So I did have a couple of just, like Asian female peers or coworkers throughout my venture, but it's not really a norm. I do think though, like tech is this interesting place where you can find a bit more of that diversity than other fields, but definitely not as represented as it could be. Why could that be? So, I mean, I feel like my brother and I, we were very lucky enough to be able to have a computer when we were younger. And I was not like an active sports person, so I would just spend time on the computer. And I don't know if, having exposure from when we were kids, having access to a home computer, especially at the time. I know I'm dating myself again, but like back in like late 90s, early 2000s, like having a computer is like a luxury in your home.
Yeah, definitely.
That's maybe like for our age. In terms of just seeing it now represented, opportunity access, lack of opportunity, I'm sure there's like just as much competent, amazing folks that aren't of the majority that exist, but maybe have not had the opportunity to shine.
Yeah, like thinking about STEM education and how early on that has to start for, kids to even think about what they want to be when they grow up and have that in their like frame. And also, you talked about like how the diversity that does exist is underrepresented, right? And so I think it's like so often it's like tech is so white, but tech is so white, but it's discounting the experiences of folks who aren't white who do work in tech, by not, sharing that experience. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts about that. And that kind of leads into the next question. I always ask folks about imposter syndrome, which my therapist says really isn't a thing, but that's a whole nother story. Tell me a little bit about, like, has imposter syndrome come up for you in your career? Like, how are you, if so, like, what are your tips and tricks or things that you've done to mitigate that?
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like it's like a weekly thing for me, just questioning one's worth. Like the whole point of my career was to like question my worth and whether or not I'm worthy enough to even be in the creative industry. But it is definitely still a regular cadence for me. How to like mitigate it or address it. It is a lot of self-work as well as, yes, like going to the therapist, just talking things through, dismantling some of the ideas that I've had in my head. But I don't know, like I feel like imposter syndrome is kind of rampant in not just our own like career life, but more like personal lives in general. Like I've felt that a lot in quite a bit of the things I do, like extracurricular activities or hobbies, like whether or not I'm quote unquote good enough to do this or that. It's just more working on one's internal self and knowing that like we are all inherently worthy and capable, as well as knowing that we can get better in our field. Like that's the one thing that I have in my mind is like if I know that I feel like I know everything, that's when I hit this plateau where it's like, oh no, that's stagnation for sure.
Yeah.
But talking about it for sure with other folks, I've spoken about this very same thing with my bosses and mentors before, and knowing that it's not like just me, but with people or found in people that I like highly respect and admire is helpful for sure.
Yeah. All right. What are your, like, looking at your career, what do you like best? What's your favorite thing about what you do?
So I feel like one of my traits is being a people pleaser, and it has pros and cons, you know, but like the good thing about it is this notion of like wanting to make people happy, like people being not necessarily just our clients that we work with, but as well as like the end consumers and customers, knowing that we can provide them solutions that, you know, are great, innovative as well as intuitive, looks amazing. That also betters the world. Any project that I'm on that ultimately helps to like better people in whatever capacity are ones that I really get into and enjoy the most, because there's some semblance or notion of knowing that I am helping humanity. I feel like sometimes like in our field, it can feel like, what is the point of all of this in terms of like, well, we're making things more efficient or we're making things faster, but we do lose like that human aspect of things. And so being able to like tap back into that like human empathic notion helps to really like motivate my work, which otherwise it can be pretty monotonous in a way.
Yeah, that's so cool to think about it. You know, like if you're designing a website, sure, you're working with a client and you're meeting their needs, but then you're potentially impacting thousands of people who are going to visit that website every day, right? And that's really cool.
Yeah, like in the instance of like an e-com website, we can, you know, make the design optimized in a way that helps people like buy things more. And if you think about it from like a money aspect, yeah, you know, we are making it easier for things for people to like buy things, but at the same time, we're also improving their experience. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Totally. What about like looking back, things that you would do differently, you know, like something you regret, like what would you change about your career, if anything?
Yeah, and that was there's a notion I mentioned before about like when I feel like I know it all, that point of stagnation. I remember like right after I graduated college, I had this like naive sense in me to think that like I don't ever have to learn again, because I just graduated. Like I thought like I'm very like goal oriented or goal based. So I'm like, okay, finally the learning is over after having done it for the last 20 something years.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was just so woefully proven wrong to me. I think I hit a point where I was like, I wasn't growing. And so like knowing that part of that process of getting better is the learning, is part of that journey, and being able to appreciate the journey. That's one of the things, like if I were to like do over my life again a bit, like not being so tied to the end result of things, but more of really enjoying the process of getting there. And that's applicable to not just work, but like all parts of life.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that's very real. If someone aspires to be in a similar role, like getting into web design, what would you recommend?
I think there are a ton of really great online resources for like online courses out there when it comes to like, I always see ads for like UX UI, online courses for folks to study. There's a ton of visual design classes or more traditional graphic design classes out there, like on Coursera, like Udemy. There's just so much knowledge, like a wealth of knowledge out there. And yeah, like to some varying degree, there's probably better quality courses than others. But you know, like for folks that are really motivated, that really want to learn and get into this field, like it's all out there for us. And it just takes the person that's super motivated and willing to go forth and do. I think the other kind of big key is also mentorship. So I've not had really a creative mentor in my life. I've had teachers, but they were more like towards that traditional fine arts field. But I would recommend, you know, I know there are organizations out there that do provide mentorship for young adults to see what our field really is like, and even to have that exposure. I don't think I know, like, well, right now, I think the work that I do didn't really even exist when we were younger, or like a student at the time, but knowing that careers like this exist is really eye-opening. I remember when I was still living in Chicago, one of my acquaintances had asked me to do like a professionals day for, they were a teacher, a grade school teacher at one of the inner city schools in Chicago. And so I ended up going there as like, well, like as, I guess maybe like a web designer, and kids didn't even know that, well, they were like 9 or so, but like they didn't know that people created like web and mobile experiences at that time. They were just like, oh, I didn't know that you could go to school for that and like get a job for that. Like, yeah, so you know, if you don't want to aspire to be like a rocket scientist, but you love mobile apps and websites, there's a great field for you to get into that. So just having that exposure, I think, is pretty key as well.
Yeah. I think you're totally
and
right.
that kind of does touch upon like representation that we had mentioned a bit earlier of knowing that, you know, it's accessible to literally anyone, but knowing that that even exists for folks is really important.
Yeah, definitely. All right, one last question before we shoot it back over to Justin and the audience questions. If you could share one piece of wisdom that has benefited you in your career, what would it be?
I think it's tied to like what I would change about my life, and that would be literally just knowing the journey. Not being so tied to the end goal or the destination, but really enjoying where one is at in the process. Yeah.
Words to live by.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, yeah, in theory, it sounds great, but in practice, it's very challenging for me.
Yeah,
anyway, for sure.
Yeah, me too, for sure. Okay, so Justin just put a QR code on the screen, and so you can use your cell phone to access that easily, or you can go to menti.com and enter in the code. So we'll give everyone just a second to do that, and then he'll pull up the questions that we've had coming in. Let's take a look. Ooh, cool. Do you still dabble in photography, Tiffany? Or do you have an Instagram or a virtual space where people can check out your stuff?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't really do that anymore. That, and I used to draw a lot when I was younger, and I also don't do that very much anymore. I know I'm kind of in like this interesting creative rut a little bit. But in the past, I have joined in on Inktober. It's like in the month of October, you have a whole month with prompts every day to draw whatever you'd like. And that has actually helped me to motivate myself to, on a regular cadence, draw. So I do have an Instagram. It's basically like life photos and a whole slew of Inktober drawings at this point. But not a ton of creative hobbies just for the pure joy of being creative. That is something like that I'm still working through right now, of like motivating myself to create just to create.
Yeah. The play side of things, right? It's like, even if you do that for your job, it's like, how do you bring it in where you're just, it's not a means to an end, it's just the enjoyment.
Totally. But I mean, I'm creative in other ways. I feel like, so I take dance classes at a studio, and that's like my creative outlet there. I also like cooking, and I get to be creative in that. So there's nothing really visual, but more experiential.
Yeah, super cool. Awesome. How often does the discussion of digital accessibility come up with current or new clients? What do you do for proactive strategies to help with ADA compliance?
Ooh,
that's a great question.
Yeah. I know that has become more of a pretty large topic in our projects, actually. And not a project that I am in on, but we did have a project that just wrapped up recently, in which there is, I think there was web safe color accessibility for folks that have, I guess, visual impairments. It was a very complex dashboard information design kind of project. And so being able to see colors in a way very clearly was very important for that specific project and client. But digital accessibility in itself as a topic comes, I think, up front once we start scoping out that project. If it's very top of mind for that specific client, we do try our best, even in our own like daily process when we're designing things, of like testing out colors, seeing if things are legible or not, having being able to like mirror things. Yeah. But, excuse me, this is just work from home life happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like as a company we can definitely still push on it, but yeah, that's how we're doing it now.
Cool. Okay, so I think we have time for one more. You mentioned you wish you had known your endpoint sooner. Do you not think the journey was important in getting to the endpoint? And I think you kind of already answered that, but I'll let you touch on it more.
Yeah, the journey itself, I think, is more important, really. Every time I have like this interesting, like reflective point in my life where I think back about all the things that led up to a specific event happening, I'm like, wow, I'm appreciating it in retrospect, but I wish I could have appreciated it more at the time. Even like things that didn't work out, very well, like things that I'm like, at the time, I'm like, oh, this is horrible. Now I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so blessed for it to happen. And things that I used to think that were like failures or hindrances or obstacles, in the end, they just helped me to become more resilient and stronger and be the person that I am. So everything is a blessing, even though sometimes it's a disguise.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions and for taking the time to be interviewed, Tiffany. I loved this conversation, and I think it's going to be great to share on our YouTube channel and with like other folks who are thinking about getting into design. So as we wrap up, just a note about our September I Am Tech Oregon event. Join us on September 9th for a conversation with Marty Gator about his work as a digital accessibility advocate. So Marty, I think, is on the call right now, and he has provided a resource in the chat, which is awesome. So registration for Marty's event is going to be live at Tech Oregon/events today, and I'll also send a registration link out with the feedback survey that y'all will get. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and I hope you stay cool out there for everyone that's over here in Oregon, where we are having a very hot few days. So have a beautiful Thursday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Again. Bye.
Bye.